pretty stunning position if you think about it in the abstract, about the notion of just ignoring a judge's position. So my question is, when this case is resolved by the Supreme Court, should the administration follow that decision if that decision ends up banning this abortion drug?
There's a fascinating coalition of legal experts and DC politicians who are arguing that the Biden administration, along with the Food and Drug Administration, should just completely ignore a federal judge's ruling that would reverse the approval of mifepristone, which is of course one of the abortion drugs. Now, reversing the FDA's approval would mean that the abortion drug would be outlawed all throughout the country, not just in Texas. And AOC argues that that decision should be completely ignored. Now, is there precedent for this? What's the real argument here? I want to go to a few videos. Here's AOC saying that there is, in fact, some precedent for ignoring the federal judge's decision here.
There is an extraordinary amount of precedent for this. There is a term known as agency non-acquiescence. And this has been used, and for folks saying this is a first, that this is precedent setting, it is not. The Trump administration also did this very thing, but also it has happened before. The idea of consistency in governance until there is a higher court ruling is not an unprecedented thing to happen. In fact, when the Trump administration did it, it was arguably through a much, a very grave issue when it came to DACA. The Trump administration was ordered to fully reinstate DACA, the DACA program, and they, in a complete defiance, did not do that.
So this is a fascinating proposal, and she says there's precedent for it. I did a little digging, and look, I don't know if it's as clear as she's stating it is, but I do like that she wants the Biden administration to play hardball. But there are limitations, even if the Biden administration decides, well, no, we're just gonna ignore this federal judge's decision. The downsides are, once a Republican administration comes into power, then they can unilaterally decide to uphold this federal judge's ruling that reverses the FDA's approval of the abortion pill, right? So there's that. But it's interesting because there are other people who are arguing that the Biden administration should do this, including Senator Ron Wyden, who is a Democrat, of course. He says, I believe the Food and Drug Administration has the authority to ignore this ruling, which is why I'm again calling on President Biden and the FDA to do just that. The FDA, doctors, and pharmacies can and must go about their jobs like nothing has changed and keep mifepristone accessible to women across America. If they don't, the consequences of banning the most common method of abortion in every single state will be devastating. And I definitely agree with him on how devastating it would be. And then you have Nancy Mace, which we'll get to in just a moment, a Republican who agrees with AOC and Wyden. Before we get to that, Cenk, what are your thoughts?
There are two different scenarios here, and they're very different. One is where we are today with two different conflicting federal judge orders. Now, if the Biden administration says, listen, I don't know which one to follow. I want to follow the orders, but I don't know which one to follow. So that's why the Texas judge can't trump the Washington state judge. I'm gonna have to let this go to appeals courts and then maybe even the Supreme Court if the appeals courts disagree before I implement the judge's decision, okay? So I think that is very understandable, and there's a really good argument to be made there. When it gets to the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court says, no, that's it, you can't sell this drug anymore, and it makes no sense, but a lot of things the Supreme Court says makes no sense. Supreme Court declared corporations human beings. Okay, that makes no sense, and they have the freedom of speech given to them by their creator as an inalienable right. Okay, that makes no sense at all, but yet we all have to live with it. And so overturning a Supreme Court, not listening to a Supreme Court decision is very dangerous. So the Supreme Court is horrific. I can't stand the Supreme Court. But if we have a Democratic administration not listen to a Supreme Court decision, man, that's gonna open the floodgates. Republicans aren't gonna listen to any court decision that they don't agree with. They're gonna do it instantly, and they're gonna do it 200 times more than the Democrats are. So I would be super worried about that precedent.
So I hear you on that. Look, I'm less definitive than you are, because while I hear you, right, like having every institution in America break down and just refusing to go along with our system of checks and balances could be dangerous. But what's so frustrating is our institutions have become increasingly illegitimate thanks to the corruption, right? So we did a lengthy piece last week on Clarence Thomas and his corruption, how he's going on $500,000 trips every year paid for by a billionaire real estate mogul, okay? And you think that doesn't have an impact on the decisions that he makes in the Supreme Court? So like, I bring that up as just one example of the corruption that has completely taken hold. We've got activist judges, we've got corrupt politicians, people don't have any faith or trust in our institutions. It's just really hard to want to uphold a decision by a corrupt Supreme Court. But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, no, we can't do it, guys. We can't do it because we're gonna have anarchy. I'm serious. So look, you want to talk about corruption? Congress is the most corrupt body that I've ever seen in my lifetime, that anybody's ever seen. Almost all of them are bought by donors. They all get millions of dollars by donors. The only jackasses in the country who don't think that they're all completely bribed are mainstream media reporters who are like, oh, billions of dollars in bribes. I can't see it, right? So the president is almost always corrupt. They're bought by even bigger bribes. So if we say, well, I'm not listening to them because they're corrupt, we're gonna have anarchy. So we have to do things the right way. We have to do them politically, rhetorically, ideologically. We have to win on those fronts. And by the way, that doesn't mean that you go quietly into that good night. No, hell no. By the way, one of the things I think we should do, especially if the Supreme Court rules the way that, with the right-wing judge, is massive civil disobedience. Massive. That's on us as citizens to do civil disobedience. But if the government stops listening to one another, either the different branches or federal and state, soon we will have people at the government level drawing guns on each other. And that's a disastrous idea.
So Nancy Mace, who is a Republican lawmaker, conservative lawmaker, happens to agree with Wyden and AOC. I want to go to her video and discuss.
This is an FDA-approved drug. I support the usage of FDA-approved drugs, even if we might disagree. It's not up to us to decide as legislators or even, as the court system, that whether or not this is the right drug to use or not, number one. So I agree with ignoring it at this point, but there are other lawsuits that are happening right now in other states as well over this issue. But to look at the case itself, when you look at the law that the judge used, an old law that the Supreme Court said was unconstitutional, this thing should just be thrown out, quite frankly.
So you think the FDA should ignore this?
I would.
So that's interesting. And she, even though she's conservative, she has come out multiple times against some of the more extreme measures taken by Republican lawmakers to outlaw abortions. I have a feeling because of what she went through in her life, she was a victim of sexual misconduct. It sucks that politicians need to experience things firsthand to understand how much of an impact their legislation has on people's lives. But I think that's what happened with her, right? She understands what it means to potentially get pregnant with a rapist baby.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna be the jaded one here. I don't think that's it. I think she's just a politician. And so, but she's a relatively intelligent politician, which is very rare. And she realizes this is going to slaughter Republicans across the country.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. Yeah.
I mean, look, guys, about 70% of the country believes in pro-choice, significantly pro-choice, okay? And you saw pro-choice ballot measures win in Kentucky, Montana, Kansas, and Kansas won by about 20 points. And it was mainly Republicans voting, Republicans and independents voting in a primary situation. So they see the handwriting on the wall. They're trying to backpedal the hell out of the room. Nancy Mace happens to be one of the ones that are like barely conscious, as opposed to the other Republicans who are like, and they're waiting for memos and talking points and stuff. Here, in fact, I'll make another fun prediction. I think that the Republicans are gonna turn around because of the drug companies, which I talked about earlier in the show. The drug companies own the Republican Party. They're never going to allow this ruling to stand because it could affect all drugs eventually. So I think the Republicans will turn around and claim, nah, states' rights. We got to let California and New York make their own decisions. So that's why we're against this. Tony Gonzalez screwed it up by saying states' rights in the wrong direction in a different interview on CNN, right? But my guess is the consultants will figure it out and go, oh, no, we meant states' rights where the blue states can still have abortion and can still have this pill. And they're gonna get the hell out of the room because that's what their donors are going to demand from them. A big pharma #1 donor in the country.
Okay, now I'm gonna argue with you because, it's interesting because you say you're against this. Like, let's say the case works its way all through the courts, makes it to the Supreme Court, and let's say the Supreme Court rules in favor of upholding the federal judge's decision and reversing the FDA's approval for this drug. It's interesting because the courts wouldn't be respecting the system of checks and balances because back in 1938, yes, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. That was when Congress gave the FDA overarching authority to determine whether drugs are safe and effective, okay? And the judge, in this case, the Texas judge is like, nah, I don't like that they decided to approve this drug. I don't think that they took the appropriate safety protocols, even though I have no evidence of that whatsoever. So why is it that the courts in this case can go ahead and give Congress the middle finger when it comes to the power that they decided to give the FDA?
So this is decided a long time ago in Marbury v. Madison. There's the seminal court case where the Supreme Court basically took a right that is not actually in the Constitution, by the way, where they say we get to decide what's constitutional and not constitutional, and we can overrule bills that Congress and the executive branch passed, okay? So if we undo that, then the courts are gonna have almost no leverage at all. And so that's a very dangerous place. It basically gets you to where Netanyahu is trying to bring Israel, where the courts don't have enough say, okay? So now the courts often make preposterous decisions, right? So look, if you're a right winger, you say Roe v. Wade, where the hell was that in the Constitution? Okay, and I actually think you're right. I think it was activist judges who said, I want abortion to be legal, so I'm just gonna pretend it's in the Constitution. It wasn't, okay? Same thing with Citizens United. The Supreme Court 100% made up that bribery is constitutional. The Constitution doesn't say that at all. The Constitution doesn't say corporations have human rights. Our founding fathers despised corporations, despise them. It's an absurd argument to make. They're dead wrong, okay? But it doesn't matter. If you say, hey, the courts, when I think the courts are wrong, I'm not going to listen to them, we're gonna have chaos.
Okay, so a few other things I wanted to bring up. So some experts in reproductive health law and drug policy say that while the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade allowed each state to decide whether to ban or permit abortion, it did not allow states to take actions to bar the medications used in abortion because those are regulated by the FDA. So let me give you a few excerpts from the New York Times on this. States are allowed to adopt some laws and regulations that supplement federal rules on drugs and to regulate the practice of medicine within their jurisdiction. But states cannot impose policies that interfere with or contradict FDA standards or requirements, so they cannot ban or drastically restrict a medication the federal government has approved, these experts say. Now, I've got more on this, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I want to get to solutions. And so a short-term solution we talked about a little bit earlier in the show is civil disobedience, right? And so, and it goes towards partly addressing what you said earlier too, Anna, which is that Martin Luther King would point out from time to time, hey, when we do civil disobedience in the South, we're not actually breaking the law. It's actually the local sheriff that's breaking the law. The federal law supersedes state's law, and Martin Luther King and all the civil rights activists were always doing the legal thing, not the illegal thing. But they had to do disobedience at the local level to have that work, okay? So you could definitely do that, and if the Supreme Court rules in the direction of banning this pill, we should definitely do that all across the country, okay? And in the long term, the political solution to this is stop electing Republicans. Now, I'm not a guy I hate both parties. I think corruption is rampant in both parties. So I'm not doing it like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi in like some sort of like totally disingenuous way. I'm just saying, if you believe women should have the right to choose, Republicans don't believe that. They just don't. 98% of them say, no, I'm gonna take away your rights, and I'm going to appoint judges and justices that take away women's rights.
God, we're so doomed.
So then vote against Republicans. 7 out of 10 of us want women to have this right. So it's not that complicated. The only problem is we get to the voting booth and we have people go, well, I know, but the M&Ms are the wrong gender or something, so I'm gonna vote for Republicans. Well, okay, then they're gonna take away your rights. They tell you 1,000 times over they're gonna do it, and they did do it. They did do it. So wakey, wakey, wake up. These guys they just don't believe in the same things we do. That's why we have a democracy where you vote their asses out.
You know, Chuck Schumer, he's using this pretty tragic federal judge's ruling to argue the same thing. Like we need to get more Democrats elected. We need to take charge of the House again so we can protect women's reproductive rights. Except like we know that they're not gonna do that.
No, you're right, Anna. So that's why you should do civil disobedience against Democratic leadership too. Because those sons of bitches never represent you, they're always lying. That's why when we tell you to go vote to get your rights back, people rightfully say, really? The Democrats never deliver, never. They said they were gonna get us our voting rights. We gave them the House, the Senate, and we gave them the presidency. We did that in 2020, and then they didn't do it. They didn't do it, they didn't do the bare minimum. So Democratic leadership is 100% full of crap. I don't trust Chuck Schumer 1%. I think he's totally lying. And I think if you gave him a supermajority, they probably still wouldn't do it.
Agreed.
Then you know what you should do? You should do massive civil disobedience against Democratic leadership and say, God damn it, either represent us or we're gonna vote you out. It's called primaries, guys. And the mainstream media despises primaries because they don't want you to find out you could vote out Democrats too. We have the vote, we barely have it, but by all means go use it. And don't just use it in general elections. Primaries are even more important because these Chuck Schumer guys are frauds. They never deliver on anything they say. So throw the bums out in the Democratic Party and throw the bums out in the Republican Party. And by the way, good news, young voters are now starting to control elections. What happened in Wisconsin with the Supreme Court was amazing. And even Scott Walker was like, oh, young voters are killing us. Yes, yes, go take out all these corrupt incumbents. Go protect your rights. And they don't let the mainstream media lie to you. The most important thing in the world is the primaries where you could vote out corrupt incumbents. They don't want you to use that power. Don't listen to them. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.